We've got a treat today with Gara LaMarche, who is one of our most important philanthropic leaders and one of the strong supporters that made health reform possible, and we're very grateful to him. He is the head president and CEO of Atlantic Philanthropies. We are very pleased in New York City. We're very glad he had the good sense to hire someone we love dearly, Nat'l Lawrence, who used to be our field director, who's here today with her daughter Leah. And we have Alice Duff with us as well from Oakland. We're just very glad to have his team. But he has had a very wonderful and interesting life. He grew up in Rhode Island. And he was the first in his family, I didn't know until today, to go to college. But he went off to Columbia College, Columbia University in New York City. And while he was there, he was a nursery school teacher, which means he comes with strong credentials for our freedom school work. I didn't know that about you, Gara, either until today. I learned a lot about you today, and I was very pleased about that. But he is someone who has used his life to make sure that the human and civil rights of other people are protected. He worked in a wide variety of positions. He's worked with the ACLU in a number of roles, and I'm particularly happy to hear how much he challenged the death penalty in Texas, which has been one of our meanest states and one of the largest killers of people, and that one of these days we're going to get back to where we don't have a death penalty in America. But Gara's work will have made a difference. But he's worked at the ACLU in a wide variety of roles. And then he went to the Open Society Institute, which is George Soros' philanthropic foundation, and was a vice president there for about 11 years. And now he has come to Atlantic Philanthropies, where he's got the enviable job of figuring out how to go out of business and spend $4 billion over the next 8 years. What a wonderful role to have. But how grateful we are that somebody is doing that from a social justice perspective, and who is committed to making sure that those who are disadvantaged, including disadvantaged children and youth and the elderly, will be protected. And we're so eager to thank him for coming down and to get introduced to Haley Farm in this hot weather. He is a father, he has 2 adult children, but I hope when he comes before you that you will give him your very, very special attention. He's been a very strong supporter of the Children's Defense Fund, and all the millions of Americans who are going to have access to health care are going to be able to do so in large part because of his leadership and his support. So Gara, we're very happy to have you with us. Mr. Gara LaMarche.
Hello, everybody. And thank you, Marion. It was a big first for me. I never had my name in a FAM before. I'm really excited about it. I want to start out by saying that I have no recollection of the commencement address when I graduated from St. Bernard's Boys High School in 1972, when I'm guessing that most of your parents were younger than you were now. I remember who spoke. He was a Republican congressman from that part of Connecticut, and I remember that he went on and on, but I have no idea what he said. On the other hand, when Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address, he said that the world will little note or long remember what we say here today. Now, Lincoln turned out to be wrong, but maybe that's because he spoke for all of 3 minutes. They asked me to talk here for 35 minutes, and that was before I knew it would be 95 degrees. So that's crazy. So there's an inverse relationship, I think, between the length of speeches and how well they're remembered, so I'm a little worried. So the smart thing for me to do, please hold your applause, would be to sit down right now. But I just got started, so at the risk of provoking collective amnesia, let me go on just a little bit more. So the question of beginning is a good place to begin, noting that this is called, so when you guys do that, what does that mean? Oh, for other people to be quiet. Oh, okay, all right. I thought I had to do that to get you to be quiet. The problem, okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyway, if you're like me, you never thought much about the words or what is meant by graduation. But to graduate is to move up. To commence is to begin. We usually think of graduation and the commencement speech that is a part of it as occasions for marking the end of something. In this case, your intense and amazing week at the Ella Baker Child Policy Training Institute. I was exhausted just looking at your schedule for the week and the list of authors, professors, organizers, performers, journalists who have been your guides during the week. But you know that, in fact, this week is just a beginning, not an end. You know that it has better prepared you to take your place in the historic, life-changing work of the Freedom Schools, one of the most important initiatives in protecting our very American democracy and its promises of freedom, equality, and justice. And from there to play your part in helping this country live up to its founding promises. And you know what you do not know, which is the most important outcome of a good education. Yes, you were informed and inspired by Tavis Smiley and Pedro Noguera and Sandra Samuels and Tommy Watson and Dr. Hairston and Taylor Branch and Hollis Watkins and Dr. Harris Bracewell and that national treasure we call Marian Wright Edelman. But all they did was whet your appetite for more. They made you realize that there are so many stories to be told, so many elders to sit by, so many skills to build, so many strategies to employ and perfect. It's a lifetime's work moving this country and this world towards social justice for all people. And fortunately, you have a lifetime to do it in. So tonight is a night to celebrate the hard work you have done this week, to dance and pray and sing and cheer, to hug your new friends and savor the phenomenal experience you have all shared. And tomorrow is a day to get busy, because everything we care most about, everything that brings us here, is infused, or should be, with the fierce urgency of now. Now, in what I've said so far, I may have given the impression that learning and social justice leadership is something passed down or on to the young from the old, or for those of us who don't like to think of themselves as old, from the older. And yes, I believe we have much to learn from the experience of those who came before us, and that in order to change our history, we have to be grounded in a knowledge of what came before us. But I also believe very deeply that the young can and must lead the old, that learning is very much a two-way street. I know this first from my own life. I know what I was capable of when I was your age, and I've never forgotten it in the years since as I've moved further along the generational spectrum. Very little in my middle-class Catholic upbringing in a small, virtually all-white town in New England prepared me for the work that I do today. I was a geeky kid with very few friends. I watched TV in every spare moment I had when I wasn't hanging around the library stacks, and I was always the last kid picked for teams at the local playground. I found my own power when I was 14, when I entered and won a public speaking contest for freshmen in my new high school. That came with a spot on the debate team. And in a few years of debate, I gained confidence in my writing and speaking, and in something even more valuable, in the ability to see the other side of an argument, to force myself to make the opposing case as strongly as possible so I could eventually prevail against it. Debate led me to a wider interest in politics and in civil liberties and rights. I started with challenging what I believed were unjust policies in my high school, in my church, in my hometown. This was not popular with my parents, who cringed when they saw my name on letters to the editor in the local newspaper. It was not popular with the principal. It was not popular with the pastor. However old I may seem to you, I was too young for the storied days of the civil rights movement in which the young Marian Wright found her voice and her power. I was too young for the Vietnam draft. But I opposed the war and the president who cruelly wasted so many young lives. And soon after I got to college, the first in my family, as Marian said, to get there, I became active in efforts to impeach that president, Richard Nixon. I walked the streets of New York with my fellow students collecting signatures on petitions. I spoke out at meetings. I even went on TV. As Mark Twain once said, I never let my schooling interfere with my education. But I was energized, and though in college I learned the most each day from my newfound activism. I paid for most of my tuition and living expenses with loans, and by working almost full-time, as Marion has said, in a daycare center near Harlem, where the incredible diversity of the kids, parents, and staff, racially, economically, even internationally, was thrilling to me, a template for the world I want to live in, and that I've fought for ever since. I volunteered for the American Civil Liberties Union, one of the world's oldest and most tenacious groups fighting for rights. I took notes at meetings. I did unglamorous grunt work. But over time, I came to the attention of leaders there, and I was hired for an entry-level position a year or so after college. I was associate director of the New York Civil Liberties Union, the largest state branch, at 24, and at 29, I was hired to be director of the Texas affiliate, spending 4 years doing the battle, as Marion said, against the death penalty, police violence, creationists, pro-lifers, and censors and bigots of all varieties. And after that, I realized that I could do anything. So I moved into international human rights work and eventually into philanthropy, and that is, as Marion has suggested, giving away other people's money. I've been privileged to use those posts to stand in solidarity with the most courageous people in the world, with students and parents from Oakland to Baltimore working for better schools, with rural South African mothers desperate for access to AIDS drugs, with hardworking immigrants in Arizona or Tennessee seeking full inclusion as citizens, with women and men, young people and old, gay people and straight, black people and brown people and white people fighting for their lives, and I learn from them every single day. So we all have stories that form us, and that, in short form, is mine. But we're also formed and inspired by the stories of others, and young people like you are everywhere I look, taking charge of their own lives and refusing to be patient. I'm inspired by the story of Ruby Bridges, born a week after I was, in the same year, a great year, 1954, when the U.S. Supreme Court in Brown versus the Board of Education declared unanimously that segregation in public schools was illegal and unconstitutional. At 6, Ruby became the first African-American child to desegregate an elementary school. Although she lived only a few blocks away from that school, marshals had to escort her every day past racist mobs. And since white parents pulled their children from school in protest, for an entire year she was the only student in her class. What kind of fortitude does that take? I'm inspired by the fact that the very first civil rights sit-ins were undertaken by students in high school and younger. Clara Luper and 12 other members of the NAACP Youth Council, aged 6 to 17, screwed up their courage and walked into Katz Drugstore in downtown Oklahoma City and ordered 13 Coca-Colas. I won't repeat here the vile racist epithets they endured, but thanks to the persistence of those 13 and others like them, in time all lunch counters and all 38 Katz stores in the Midwest were desegregated. We don't have to look that far back. We can see 18-year-old peace activist Ava Lowry, who endured death threats after her website featured a moving montage of photos of wounded children in Iraq. We can see Jose Luis Morantes of Miami, an immigrant rights activist who grew up with his grandparents, refugees from Cuba, leaving his evangelical church because he had too many unanswered questions. I can identify with that. Working with students working for equal rights, Jose started organizing on community college campuses on behalf of the DREAM Act, which would provide a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrant students. Whenever I mention a place, people cheer, so I should say that I live in Brooklyn. A surefire applause line. Another immigrant activist, Tom Tron, whose family fled Vietnam by boat at the end of the war, bravely testified before Congress about the DREAM Act, only to see immigration agents stage a pre-dawn raid on her family's California home the next day, taking her brother and parents into custody. She worked hard to get them released, but what was her response to that experience? It was to tell a colleague, "My family is one of the lucky ones. Most immigrants don't have access to Congress and immigration groups, they just disappear." Tragically, Tom Tron was killed by a drunk driver in Maine last month, but her work inspires us and lives on. We can see Cheyenne Hughes, who grew up on the east side of Denver, Colorado, whose passion was lit in school by a paper she researched on the Nat Turner Rebellion, and now, through the Colorado Progressive Coalition, leads campaigns on payday lending and police stops of young people of color. The organizations these young people are forming, from Equal Education in the black townships of South Africa, which documents evidence of poor performing schools like delinquent teachers and broken windows, and stages actions to force change, to COCO in South Central Los Angeles, which has used the same youth-led strategies and successful campaigns for access to college prep courses, less crowded classrooms, and more student counselors, are on the cutting edge of social change and equity at this very moment. They give me so much hope for the future. Now, we need that hope because there is so much to do. You take your place in a world where women of color have 1 penny of wealth for every dollar their male counterparts have, and a fraction of a penny for every dollar of wealth that white women have, where on the average all women make 78 cents for every dollar a man makes. You take your place in a world where the faces of brown children are erased from a mural in an Arizona school. You take your place in a world where white children in Appalachia try to learn in dilapidated schools where the roof leaks when it rains and the furnace breaks down when it's freezing. You take your place in a world where men and women in prisons and on death rows all across this country pay for a justice system in which black and brown people are failed by their schools, targeted by the police, and processed in what we call a justice system in which the quality of your representation has all too much to do with the color of your skin or the size of your bank account. You take your place in a world where schools and community clinics and hospitals and senior centers and daycare centers everywhere you work and live close or face crippling cutbacks in every community, while banks and insurance companies and oil companies that ripped off poor families, denied medical treatment to desperately sick people, and poisoned the waters escape accountability for their actions. There is so much to do, but together we can do it. A generation ago in Virginia, in a case taken by the ACLU where I first worked, the home of a black woman and a white man was raided by the police because their marriage violated that state's racist laws. But today, the son of such a union leads the free world from a house, the White House, built by slaves. The world can change, and it was changed by people like Dr. King, just 25 when he came to public prominence, and Mary Wright Edelman, by people like you. Now, two very different people died on the same day, one Friday afternoon, November 22nd, 1963, when I was a 9-year-old boy watching the clock in my Catholic school classroom, desperate for the weekend to start. One was the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, shot down by an assassin. The other was the author of The Brave New World, Aldous Huxley. They both have something to say to you and to all of us, and I will close with their words, which have so much resonance with the experience that you've all had during this amazing week. President Kennedy said, "Leadership and learning are indispensable to each other." Aldous Huxley said, "Experience is not what happens to you, it is what you do with what happens to you." I know you will go out and do something world-changing with what happens to you, and I feel privileged not just to have the time with you here tonight, but to live in a world that will be a more just and free and equal place because of what every single one of you will do. Thank you.